Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Dignified Learning webinar. We're so excited to have you as our audience today of learners. It is Tuesday, August 24th, and we are talking about a really exciting topic today, platform, which has been kind of top of mind for so many organizations and learners as they're exploring options in e-learning and trying to get started. My name is Matt Worthen, co-founder of Dignified Learning. With me today is Emily Miller. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning. Glad to be here. I'm the other co-founder of Dignified Learning.
So excited to be talking about this topic. It is an important one. It is a daunting one. It is complex, but don't worry about that. We're going to make it really easy for you today. So let's learn about some of the benefits of Dignified Learning's e-learning platform and compare and contrast some of the things that we find out in the marketplace when it comes to e-learning platforms and LMSs, learning management systems. So here's kind of a question for you. Why isn't your organization using e-learning? There's a lot that might come to mind, and if you've just joined, feel free to use the chat and let us know your thoughts. But some of the things that we hear, Emily, what comes to mind for you? I mean, we both talk to prospects and clients and individuals and organizations all the time, and we hear all sorts of things. But what comes to mind when you see this question?
Well, the first is, why isn't your organization using e-learning? Well, I think it's at its most basic level an accessibility issue, right? Like you said, it's complex to get started. Most individuals think you need a learning management system to get started, and that is extremely cost prohibitive. It's also complicated to manage. And then you also have to consider what content you're going to provide inside of that platform. And oftentimes that isn't just something that someone who might be putting on a training a few times a year for their organization necessarily has the capacity to manage. What we don't hear when we ask that question is a resounding, we're not interested in e-learning. We don't see a place for it anywhere. We're completely content with in-person trainings for everything, for all of the organizational needs that we have, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so thinking about some of the barriers, and let's define platform first. This is something that as we talk to individuals and businesses that are looking at e-learning, this is usually where they start. They start to think about where is content going to live. And that's really what a platform is. It's the place that your e-learning lives. A platform should be branded for you. And that's something that we believe at Dignified Learning. We love creating branded experiences for organizations. And we want to take that on. Managing platform is kind of a daunting task. Depending on the platform you're choosing and the learning management system that you're evaluating, we would encourage you to look at dignifiedlearning.com. We love to manage our e-learning platform on behalf of our clients and organizations just to make it easy to get into e-learning. And when we think about traditional LMSs, learning management systems, they're thought to be necessary, and we'll challenge that in this presentation. But there's an overwhelming amount of data that LMSs produce. They're also kind of built for the masses, and so there's a ton that you can change and customize and optimize, which is a good thing, but also is a barrier in itself to getting into e-learning. The amount of administration, this is something that our customers rave about. It is a hands-off experience if you choose Dignified Learning as your e-learning platform, because we take care of the administration, and administration control is one of those things. We heard it this week. That can be a full-time job depending on your organization and where you're at in the e-learning process. It's also an extremely crowded marketplace. And the most common model for LMSs outside of Dignified Learning's platform is a cost per user. And this is one of those barriers that continues to come up in conversation when we talk to organizations that are interested in e-learning. but it just doesn't make sense to pay per user annually or monthly. And so, yeah, Emily, go ahead. What are you thinking about?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, so on this spectrum, we kind of have two different needs. So one is, like you said, if you're a really small organization and you go LMS shopping, you're most likely going to be paying for seats that you don't really need, right? You're going to be in the hundreds of users. That's just the minimum cost of entry. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have organizations that say we would love to push learning, e-learning out to our community. We have no idea if we'll have 5 learners enroll or 5,000 learners enroll. And it's just simply not attainable because you have no idea of really how to budget, or if a budget even makes sense for that type of engagement.
Yeah, so traditional LMSs, the budget barrier is usually the leading cause, right? Like it's one thing to be proactive enough to imagine all of the features and benefits that an LMS even needs to have before you go into the marketplace and shopping for it. But once you go into that marketplace, oftentimes cost is driving the conversation. The price of the platform drives the conversation. And that in itself is one of the key reasons why Dignified Learning has an e-learning platform, because we wanted to overcome some of these challenges.
So let's talk through and just clarify for a second, because when we go out in the world and we talk about e-learning, the first thing that comes up is the LMS topic, right? That's what is commonplace and familiar. And at Dignified Learning, a big part of our mission is really being able to provide an alternative e-learning space that's accessible for organizations. And out of that, we created our Dignified e-learning platform, which is not an LMS. However, a lot of the features that most organizations need from an LMS, our platform will provide. So, Matt, you want to talk through kind of what that looks like and explain kind of our non-traditional take on a platform?
Yeah, I would love to. So we invite individuals and organizations into our platform so that you can control and deploy content and customize that experience. So when we look at protecting content, collecting engagement data, and taking on the burden of the administration, those 3 components are typically what we see as opening the door to organizations. You talk about reaching your audience of learners, whether they're volunteers or members of the community. It just doesn't make sense to be paying per user per seat. It's just, that the simple cost to go out and find an LMS to do that is such a barrier. And so at Dignified Learning, we don't model that way. So we're able to host content for you, protect it, collect good data, take care of that administration, make it accessible, right? It's all web-based, so it's accessible on any device, and we brand it for you. And that creates a really nice, easy-to-use experience for individuals and organizations. And we're so excited to be talking about this today, because everyone that we talk to in the e-learning space that is a buyer or representing an organization, if you ask them, what are you working on? How did you get started in e-learning? They say, well, I started Googling for platform, right? I started trying to find a platform that makes sense for me. And oftentimes these are the things that come up. And so excited to continue to hear from our community here in Ohio that we're engaged in, what our learners are looking for, what are the solutions that make sense, that meet those organizational needs. And we're always adding features to our platform as well that kind of come up by popular demand. So here are the things that are so common that we hear. If you've had a platform, most of the time you didn't love it. That's pretty common feedback. And these, by the way, are exact quotes from clients that we've had. We tried to do e-learning, but all the budget went into the platform. No budget left for content. That's not a good place to start. And so, we absolutely believe in investing in good content, and that's a service we would love to talk to you about. We have so many users, it's too expensive. right? And how and just taking that point, there's such a maintenance behind that. Users or learners that are coming into the system may not need to be there forever, but you have to have a robust internal process of removing those, or you're going to continue to pay for those license seats. We want to sell e-learning, but we don't know how to get started. That's another common thing that we hear, and we would love to take care of e-commerce for you as well. That's such a fun topic to talk about, and I'm sure we'll dive into that in a future webinar. So really, all of these things are really at the core of why we exist as a brand, to host e-learning content, provide those learner logins or access codes, to provide helpful and necessary learner engagement data, to manage that platform for you and solve those e-commerce challenges if they exist. Not all e-learning is made to be sold, of course. A lot of e-learning is not made to be sold, but if you're in an e-commerce space and you're interested in e-learning, definitely check us out. We'd love to talk to you about that.
So we want to dive in and talk about four case studies, 4 different clients that we've worked with. And one of the things we're most proud of with our platform is it's not a one size fits all solution. So like Matt said, you can let us host your content, but you get a lot of decision making authority when you do that, right? Because we are not an LMS, so we're not going to deploy our platform and say you have to use it in this one specific way. So depending on who your learners are, who you're trying to reach, what your content is, what your purpose of your e-learning is, how we shape that platform, how we build out your specific instance of it can look really different. And we want to talk through that. So you want to talk through the first one here with kind of our in-person training case study and how we help this organization transition from in-person to e-learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So all 4 of these are examples of client projects that we've taken on. And this one is one that we are starting to hear a lot about and continuing to see a lot of momentum, which is there used to be an in-person training program in place that worked well. People showed up, they participated, had lunch or what have you, spent the day in a training and left. And how do you take that kind of experience and replicate it online? And that was such a great project because we were able to implement things that weren't there in person. And that's kind of that's the aha moment you can have when you're taking an in-person training and creating that with e-learning. You can just do things that weren't there in the in-person route. That isn't to say that e-learning is always better than in-person training. That isn't true, but you can be creative and have a lot of creative, kind of challenging, engaging things to do. Things like badging, awards, discussion boards. And by the way, these types of approaches we're also seeing in a hybrid way where you can still have a live training, but an online component that companions the in-person training. And that model where maybe you have e-learning ahead of an in-person training or e-learning that follows in-person training as reinforcement.
And you do a couple of things, right? So with this particular organization, they are saving tens of thousands of dollars a year by transitioning to some of their in-person training to online. They're also opening their potential audience of learners up beyond the local geography, right? So you can have a learner joining in any part of the country for that matter. And it really gives organizations a lot of control in terms of how they're going to build, how they're going to deploy their programs. Not to say that Matt said that there's not a place for in-person training, but I think we are seeing an increased demand for high quality in-person training. And there should be a really clear rationale as to why you're bringing everybody together in one place. And if that's not there, if it's not worth it to have that in-person training, then we can build absolutely the highest quality e-learning experience. And badging, awards, discussion boards, it's very trendy right now in e-learning. If you are LMS shopping, I'm sure you've seen those terms. And really, those are vehicles for building an online community, for engaging learners. And the point isn't that the platform has that ability, but we can actually work with you and say, what do you want to incentivize? What do you want to reward? What do you want your learners actually connecting over? And how do you spark that organic conversation in a discussion board? So platform is a really powerful tool in terms of making people feel connected and making e-learning a really engaging experience.
Yeah, the next one here, working with an international labor union, this was a great challenge. They, of course, wanted a branded experience. They also requested a library of all the custom e-learning that we partnered with them to create. But in addition to that, they wanted some canned tech training, specifically on how to use G Suite. And when you have such a broad audience of learners all over the world, their technical capabilities vary widely. And so having some technical reinforcement training on top of custom e-learning was a really fun project. They were also looking for shared learner logins and really no learner data tracking. And so again, this is kind of, as the pendulum swings, this is a whole different view of an online e-learning experience. So it was such a rewarding project. And so love talking about that one because it inspires a lot of kind of non-traditional thinking when it comes to e-learning. Things like those shared logins and limiting the amount of data that is being tracked or recorded. The third, this was a great one, a local municipality wanting residents to have access to e-learning online. So when we talk about your learner community, there would be no way it would be affordable to purchase a traditional LMS and grant access to your local population to reach that content. The sheer cost alone would just prohibit that kind of model. But being able to kind of look at that through a different lens and think creatively about how to deliver that content, and also use the same platform for internal staff so you can differentiate your learner experience. And the next one is kind of similar in that same line of thinking. Small nonprofit with a large community of learners. Again, talking about that cost barrier, but being able to protect content without learner logins. That's another kind of creative way that you don't often see, and you can tie that to commerce, which was again a unique challenge we were able to overcome.
So I want to talk for a minute about some practical implications. So when we say we have a very flexible, customizable platform, in these four instances, learners are gaining access to that platform in very different ways, which is important. So if we look at our local municipality, the internal learners, that's to say, those are the employees of the municipality who are logging in to complete their training and professional development e-learning. They are receiving an email, clicking the link to set up their password, and they are logging in, right? They are being assigned courses, which I think we're most familiar with. But when it comes to residents, right, they don't have all the residents' email addresses. They don't know which residents are going to want to take them up and view the e-learning and which ones are not, right? So what makes sense in that case is for us to present them with an access code. And they take that code and they printed that on their community newsletter, sent that out, and it clearly said, go to dignifiedlearning.com and enter this access code. And as soon as they enter that, the learner would gain access to their e-learning. And obviously, it's not the same training, right? The residents were gaining access to information about how to pay their water bill or how to navigate some of the benefits of the recreation center. So again, very, very kind of different models. And, with an LMS, you are going to have a standard way learners typically have to engage the platform, and then a standard set of data that goes along with it, right? So there might be some instances where you do need to know down to the millisecond how long a learner was in a platform or was watching a video or that deep level of data might be really important for some circumstances. For us and our clients, we find that they do need some element of that learner engagement data, but it's not nearly to the degree that you would be paying for in a traditional LMS. So, like with this example of our small nonprofit, they wanted to give K-12 students access to their e-learning, but they themselves were not a school. They didn't have any right to that student data information, right? They didn't want to know which students scored well on their assessment. They didn't want to know any sensitive student information. So we just turned those features of the platform off for those individuals. Whereas the local municipality, on the other hand, really would benefit from having some indicators of how many learners logged in and what did they spend their time engaged with in there so that they can continue to build high quality e-learning for them. So we could talk forever about this, but that all of this is to say that you really do get a lot of voice in terms of what engagement data you really want to look at and what you and your organization really value, right? We don't want to put you in a situation where you're paying for a lot of data that's really nice to have that nobody's ever actually going to practically be able to use or apply with a traditional LMS.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the heart of our message today, which is don't spend money on features that you don't necessarily need, and rethink e-learning platform by checking out dignifiedlearning.com, because we can deliver on a lot of things that most LMS platforms just can't quite get, which is just at the heart of why we exist as a brand and why it's so fun to be in this business. So just at a high level, some things on the screen here that I wanted to point out, which we haven't talked about yet, which are gamification and points. This is such a kind of a buzzword when you start looking at platform and looking at e-learning as gamification. How do you customize that and make it relevant to your organizational specific goals? And that is something that we are so interested in aligning the e-learning experience to what you are looking for in your organization. How do you tie that back to metrics and conversations that are actually occurring in your experience? So that is something we definitely would love to do a deep dive with you on. Activities is another one. Making e-learning simulated and engaging. Super interesting stuff. So I just wanted to pause for a moment and say, take a look at some of these kind of traditional LMS learner data components, and then some of the things that we would talk to you about when you get into that level of platform conversation.
Yeah, so these are the six elements of learner engagement, and when we work with you, we get to talk about how we might apply some of them or all of them in a unique way that's going to give you the data that you really need to make better decisions about what your learners might need.
So we touched on this a couple times already, but who are your learners, right? And that is an important question to ask when you're shopping for a platform. Are you going to be inviting individuals that are outside of your organization? Or are they all internal learners? And you need to create a separate access system, as Emily kind of illuminated on some of those previous examples. Looking at assessment versus activity, right? That's another component that is going to come up in the platform. What are you checking for knowledge, and how are you asking a learner to apply that knowledge throughout their e-learning experience? And groups and pages are another topic when you talk about kind of social learning and inviting individuals into those discussion boards and having a branded experience. So again, just kind of trying to offer some key talking points when you're out there shopping for a platform. There's a lot that will come up, and it's a very crowded space.
Well, yeah, let's talk for just a minute, because I think everybody's really familiar with internal learners, right? That's to say that those are the employees and team members inside the organization. But when we say external learners, let's clarify that a little bit, because so often it's not even considered an option because it's just way out of the question in terms of budget. So when we say external learners, what does that mean? Well, that could mean your literal community members if you're a municipality. It could mean your clients if you're a business, your residents, your prospects even. It can be anyone outside of your organization who you want to provide some education and insight into some aspect of what you're doing or how they can engage with you. So I would just really encourage you to think about all of the learners that your organization would like to reach, and that combined with the idea of a customized platform means that you don't necessarily have to have a formal login process, right? It makes sense for your learners internally to be logging in and for you to be tracking and giving certificates and awards for their training. But if it's an external learner, there's a lot of creative ways where they're not going to feel like they're logging into a formal e-learning course, right? They're going to feel like they're clicking on a link, gaining access to a really helpful tool, and they honestly will see it as a huge benefit that your organization is extending to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Emily. In when we talk about learner access and that internal versus external, just a few things to point out. Looking at access codes versus personal login or manual enrollment. That is to say, a lot of organizations just want to send a spreadsheet of the learners they already know need to have access to a system, but there might be others that they just need to publish that access code to. Maybe it's just a clickable link. Maybe there is no login at all. And then there's the sale of a course with maybe a coupon voucher. This kind of brings to light a project we did with a private school that wanted to provide training to mom and dad at home. And they sent a coupon basically that had that code they could enter in at dignifiedlearning.com and grant access to all of the relevant training for their local school. So just different ways to provide access to the learners that you've identified. And sometimes you combine these methods to create a differentiated learning experience or just the most accessible experience that you can. So when we kind of take a step back and if you're saying, well, is the Dignified Learning Platform the right one for my project, for what I'm working on? Here are some common areas in which we could address or work with you on. Small or large volumes of learners. Small is a particularly interesting point because most LMSs have a minimum number of user seats you have to buy. And as we've gone LMS shopping for ourselves and for clients, that is always a kind of disqualifier for small organizations. An unknown or fluctuating amount of learners, that one, trying to predictably guess how many are out there. We can solve these problems for you. High turnover of learners. This is one, again, if you have volunteers or a high turnover position in your organization where you have a constantly kind of rolling list of learners. And then again, addressing that internal versus external. So if you're thinking about getting into an e-learning platform and one of these kind of scenarios is speaking to you, let's check it out. Let's see what we can do. So we want to support your learners and your whole organization. And that, again, is just at the heart of our business model and why we exist as an e-learning option.
Absolutely. And we're really happy to get your e-learning questions, whether they pertain to platform or content. Please feel free to put those in the chat or to send them to us directly. But we really like to be as creative with platform as we do with all of the custom content that we create. And even if you don't think that our platform might be the right solution for you, we'd love to meet you and talk you through the decision making that you might be going through if you're selecting an LMS. We really believe in the power of e-learning, but we've seen a lot of organizations struggle when they go to choose an LMS. And we're happy to be a resource and kind of talk through what we know and things you might want to consider that you might not know until after you purchase and go through that process.
So next time we're going to be talking about some of those, that feedback that we're getting on social media, that we're getting directly, which is kind of addressing the most common e-learning questions that we get asked. So we would love to see you next time. We had a couple calls to action during this webinar to reach out to us, and we would encourage you to go to dignifiedlearning.com to do that. Check out our freebies. We love giving away as much as we can for free, and we have a library of free resources that can help you navigate the complex world of e-learning. And we hope to see you next time.